Hello everyone. Today we're diving into 3 unsolved missing children's cases from Canada that aren't very well known, and they don't have that much information. From a 14-year-old girl who ran away from her home in rural Manitoba after a fight with her father, to a 15-year-old girl in Toronto who was last seen smiling away on surveillance footage as she walked towards an unknown individual right before she vanished, to another 15-year-old who would disappear from the notorious Highway of Tears in British Columbia after hitchhiking. What happened to these 3 teenage girls is unknown, and I'm hoping bringing some new eyes to these cases can bring some new tips, some new leads, and hopefully will eventually lead to justice for the victims and closure to their families. So let's get into the cases. On August 13th of 1987, 14-year-old Sylvia Klayh was in Brereton Lake, Manitoba at her family's cabin. Brereton Lake being a very rural area about an hour and a half east of Winnipeg. Her father and 2 siblings were there with her as well. That morning, Sylvia and her father would end up getting into a verbal argument after he asked her to go get him a rag so he can wipe up some varnish. After this, Sylvia ended up going to her bedroom, probably to blow off some steam. However, around 11 a.m., it's alleged she left the home and ran into the woods alone. And when Sylvia didn't return home for lunch around 2 p.m., her father would report her missing. However, since her father alleged that she ran away on her own, the police would not mark her as a missing child, but instead marked her as a runaway. However, despite the notion that Sylvia ran away, she didn't bring any money with her, no clothing, no belongings at all. Doesn't sound like a runaway in my opinion, and we talk quite often how you can't just run away with nothing. You need some kind of means to run away to or to have to keep you, surviving. You need money to buy food, to have a shelter. Children especially don't just run away with nothing, especially from a rural area. Police would conduct some sort of searches eventually. However, ground searches in the area didn't recover any evidence of where Sylvia would have went or what may have happened to her. It was first thought that Sylvia may have tried to travel to Ottawa. However, Ottawa is around 2,000 miles away across the country. There were also theories that maybe she possibly took the Trans-Canada Highway or maybe possibly gone south to Pembina, North Dakota in the US. As the years passed, Sylvia was never spotted in Ottawa and she never attempted to make any contact with her family. Sylvia was last seen wearing an orange and beige pop top with beige squares and orange lines, blue and green Bermuda-style shorts, and brown sandals. Sylvia Klayh has brown eyes, a thin build, and a light complexion. She was 5'6", around 100 pounds, and had long brown hair at the time of her disappearance. She was born in 1953 and may use the surname Sipranovich. And that is all the information we sadly have on Sylvia's disappearance. I couldn't find one post from a family member over the years, even on social media. No one looking for her, no old news articles or news clippings of her disappearance even. Nothing other than this one old news clipping from her disappearance in the 1980s. Which is really odd in my opinion, to why no one is looking for this missing teenage girl. Why is there no information on her? Why is there no statement from a family describing who she was, her personality, her favorite color? There's absolutely nothing on her. It really makes me wonder the type of living situation she may have been in. Looking at the situation from the information we do have, I could see her possibly maybe going for a walk in the woods after having a fight with her father to blow off some steam. Maybe she got lost in the woods or wandered onto a road and was met by foul play. Or maybe there's a possibility that she never ran off at all, and maybe there was foul play in the home. However, she did have other siblings there, so it makes me wonder what their statements were as well. But at the same time, it seems like police really didn't do much into looking into her disappearance, and they just marked her as a runaway. So did they look into the father's story? Did they even do any investigation on the home or the land other than just doing a little walkthrough to see if she was anywhere around the land? And it also makes me wonder where her mother was. Was her mother alive at that time? Did the father just take the kids up to, give the mother a break and they went up there to have some fun at the cabin? Was her mother even in her life? I haven't seen anything, which is truly sad that there's not much information on this girl, other than these few photos and a few articles. If she did truly run away, why is no one keeping her name out there? Why was there no investigation? Where is Sylvia's family? It's cases like this that make me really sad, because Sylvia was just a teenage girl, and what happened to her? Why wasn't anyone searching for her? She deserves justice just as much as any other person in any other disappearance or murder. And it really makes me wonder, where is Sylvia and what was her true story? If you have any other information on Sylvia's disappearance, please leave it down below and let's have a chat about it. I would really love to know more about Sylvia. 15-year-old Nancy Liou would last be seen alive on January 27th of 1999. Nancy was a 10th grade student at Monarch Park Collegiate, living with her father in Toronto's Regent Park area, which is a high crime rate area known for its drugs and violent crime. She was said to be an average student with no boyfriend who was very outgoing, strong-willed, and very social with a tight-knit group of friends. However, if we go back to the fall of 1998, Nancy and her father were having some issues because she was actually struggling against the rules that her father was having in the home, as most teenagers do sometimes. After her father tried to enact a curfew, Nancy ended up running away for 18 days, and she was staying with unknown friends at this time. But while she stayed with these friends, she still attended school, she still had contact with her family, and she even went to the hospital to visit her father while he recovered from a surgery that he had. So she was still very active in her community at the time. Nancy was last seen after she returned home from school on January 27th of 1999. Around 4:49 p.m. that afternoon, while her father took a nap, Nancy would be caught on surveillance camera leaving her apartment near Dundas Street East and Parliament Street. The video is said to show her standing by the rear door of her apartment for around 10 seconds as she waited for someone. She has a big smile on her face as she sees the person in the parking lot and runs towards them. Now, despite this camera capturing Nancy, there were no other angles of the parking lot, so to this day, we do not know who Nancy was running towards. We don't know if she left on foot with this individual or got into a vehicle. Eventually, Nancy's father would wake up, and when he realized Nancy wasn't there, he stayed up all night waiting for her into the next day. When she still didn't return home, he ended up calling her school to see if she'd arrived there to take her exam, because it was actually an exam day. However, the office ended up telling him that the teacher actually didn't take attendance during exams, which is wild to me. I feel like teachers should always be taking attendance, and if a student's not showing up, the parent should be immediately notified. But this essentially meant that no one knew whether or not Nancy had arrived at school that day or even gone to school at all. But when he still couldn't find any sign of Nancy at all, he ended up going and reporting her missing to the Toronto police. Now, since Nancy had a history of running away in her past, the police immediately marked her as a runaway again, just like we seen in the last story. And because of this, her disappearance didn't really receive much media attention. And again, this is something that really infuriates me. If a teenager runs away on their own, or if they disappear at someone else's hand, shouldn't it still be just as urgent? Because they're a child still, they're not a legal adult, they could be in just as much danger, especially if they're putting themselves in dangerous high-risk situations by running away. It would mean they would have a better chance of meeting foul play. So you'd think the police would take that more seriously. However, it's the opposite way, which is, it's crazy to me. But for whatever reason, police sadly don't see it that way. The only information that police did end up attaining was that Nancy had told a family member that she was going to meet up with someone that day or do something that day of her disappearance. However, Nancy didn't tell this person where she was going or with whom. Her family member did press, however, that she didn't make any indications that she wanted to run away. After that January 27th in 1999, Nancy has never been seen or heard from again. She hasn't contacted her friends or her family like she did in the previous times that she ran away, and she's never been spotted at any of the locations she would frequent, such as the local Regent Park Community Center that she liked to hang out at. And since police didn't really search for Nancy in the initial stages of her disappearance, her case essentially went cold. However, it was reopened 20 years later in June of 2019. But despite some tips coming in, no one has reported seeing Nancy after 3 p.m. that afternoon when she disappeared. The surveillance footage is the last time she was ever seen. Nancy was last seen wearing a white waist-length winter jacket, blue jeans, and black platform shoes. She is of Asian descent with a fair complexion and medium build, standing 5'5" and weighing around 120 pounds. She had long dark brown hair with blonde streaks, brown eyes with a small black birthmark on her left cheek, and a scar on the left side of her upper lip. Nancy is considered to be endangered and missing, however, no foul play has been determined at this time. Which, in my opinion, if a 15-year-old girl goes missing and she's not found, I feel like there has to be some kind of foul play involved. Now, when it comes to theories of what happened to Nancy and her disappearance, the big one seems to be that Nancy may have met someone at the Regent Park Community Center. Maybe a predator or someone older that got close to her. Considering she was kind of having some issues with her father, an older man might have made her feel more comfortable. They may have groomed her over time, told her not to tell anyone, and then told her that day to meet up with him outside in that parking lot. And from what we do know, she seemed happy in the surveillance video. She's smiling. She doesn't look scared to go towards this person. She seems happy to. So she must have known this person that she was going with that day. Maybe they promised to take her on a trip somewhere fun, and they ended up luring her off that way, only to take advantage of her. Because in my opinion, it's very unlikely this young girl ran off on her own free will and has been just living somewhere out in Canada maybe for the last 20 years. Even when she stayed at her friend's place for those 18 days, she still messaged her friends, she still talked to her family, she still went and visited her father, she still went to school. She was still very active in her community. She didn't just drop off the face of the earth. As I said, the biggest theory is at this point is that maybe there was an older man that groomed her and then led her off. But the thing with that is if she did have an older boyfriend, she didn't tell any of her friends or family about it. Again, that might be because this older person told her not to. Despite It being said she didn't have a boyfriend, I did see some talk online that she might have had a boyfriend around her age. And it also makes me wonder who these friends were that she was staying with for the 18 days and who her friends were that she really hung around with a lot. Police did come forward when they reopened the case and did a YouTube video on her case. And in this video, they did say that Nancy's family and friends have been cleared. So who did she go off with then? That is the big question. Who did Nancy walk towards in that parking lot? Delphine Nikal was born on February 16th of 1975 on her family's farm near Smithers, a very small rural town in central British Columbia with beautiful mountain views. The Trans-Canada Highway also runs directly through the small town, which is concerning considering how many Indigenous women have disappeared from the Trans-Canada Highway, which is now also called the Highway of Tears. And Delphine was actually a member of the Wet'suwet'en tribe, making her later disappearance even more haunting. Growing up, Delphine was the youngest in her family, and was said to be an adventurous child who loved animals and spending time with her father on his farm. However, sadly, her father would pass away when she was only 11 years old. After this, Delphine and her mother would end up moving about 15 minutes south to the town of Telkwa. In 1990, Delphine was 15 years old now, and tragedy would once again strike when her mother would end up suffering from complications of a surgery and would end up spending 4 months in a coma in Prince George Hospital. Seeing as the hospital was actually 4 hours away from their town, Delphine ended up moving in with her uncle Frank Tompkin because he lived across the street from her and her mother so he could take care of her. Around 2 p.m. on Wednesday, June 13th of 1990, Delphine told her uncle she was going to hitchhike to Smithers to meet up with her close friend, Crystal Grenke, and 2 other girls. Since the towns were so close together, only 15 minutes away by car, it was very common in this time period for people to hitchhike from town to town. And Delphine would end up hitchhiking and arriving in Smithers alive and well and spending the day hanging out with her friends. As evening came, they would all head over to the Mohawk gas station, which was located at the corner of Main Street and Highway 16. Before going their separate ways, however, Delphine would end up asking her friends if they wanted to sleep over at her house because her mother wasn't there. But the girls were unable to because they had school and work in the morning. They did later note that they found this question odd because Delphine had never asked them to come over and hang out with her at her house before. But after this, Delphine called her uncle, I'm assuming on a payphone possibly, and informed him that she was about to head home. Delphine was last seen hitchhiking on the eastbound lane of Highway 16, also known as the Highway of Tears, and she would never make it home after this. The next day, on June 14th, her family would end up reporting her missing. However, as we've heard in every case tonight, police would end up marking Delphine as a runaway and just assumed that she'd eventually show back up at home. It didn't help either that Delphine was Indigenous, which, as we've learned now over all of these cases that we've covered together and talked about, we know especially back in the 90s that the police force in Canada didn't really care about the well-being of our Indigenous people. On top of that, Delphine was known by police. She had previous minor offenses like theft and mischief, and she'd actually been in a youth facility in British Columbia at one point. However, despite this, Delphine's family knew she did not run away, especially with her mother being in the hospital. On top of that, she left all of her belongings behind, which, as we know, is always a red flag. A 15-year-old girl isn't just going to hitchhike somewhere in a rural province with no money, no clothing, no belongings. It's not likely she ran away, but police didn't seem to care. Police never searched for Delphine, meaning it was up to her family to search for her. They went door to door, driving as far as 13 hours away to Vancouver to look for her. Her sister Mary saying, and I quote, "There was literally no support. The cops never really showed a whole lot of interest. They obviously didn't really care." End quote. Now later on, with the help of CanPro Investigation Services and the Missing Children Society of Canada, some tips eventually began to trickle in. An employee at the Mohawk gas station would end up coming forward saying that he witnessed Delphine getting into a red sports car the day of her disappearance at the gas station, which made sense because we knew she was hitchhiking. Other leads suggested that Delphine had ended up at a party in a rural area outside of Smithers that night, but all of these leads led to dead ends. Her uncle was even looked into, but there was no signs or evidence of foul play on his part either, and he'd eventually pass away with no answers to what happened to his niece. In 2019, other witnesses would come forward and also confirm that Delphine most likely had gotten into a vehicle that day of her disappearance and was most likely met by foul play by that individual. To make matters worse, just a year before Delphine's disappearance, her cousin Sylvia Nikal also vanished from Vancouver after arriving to visit her mother, but then she allegedly decided to become homeless at the age of only 15 years old. Cecilia was last seen by her mother in October of 1989. Another family member would report that Cecilia may have moved to Vancouver Island. However, that was never confirmed. Now, I think one of the biggest red flags here is that Delphine's case is so similar to the other Highway of Tears cases. An Indigenous woman hitchhiking on the same stretch of road who goes missing and is never found. Or eventually turns up deceased. There's dozens and dozens of these cases, unfortunately, and maybe one day I will make a series of it. I've had some requests before to do it. It is just a very, very deep rabbit hole to go down. But if you ask me, I think that is the most likely scenario here of what happened to Delphine. She got into this red sports car, and whoever was driving that car had ill intentions. The question is, if Delphine did get in with them, where did they take her and what did they do with her? In the recent years, with how many women have disappeared from this stretch of highway, the RCMP has actually started a task force called E-PANA, which is investigating the unsolved disappearances and murders from the Highway of Tears. Articles reading, and I quote, "The purpose of the task force was to determine if serial killers or killers is responsible for murdering young women traveling along the major highways of BC." End quote. And Delphine's case is actually one of these cases that they're looking into. So could the driver of this red sports car be the individual that this task force has been looking for all along? Could he be a serial killer or one of many killers who hunts along the Highway of Tears, targeting vulnerable women trying to hitchhike along it? The caseworker in Delphine's case would later say, and I quote, "Delphine loved to spend time with her father on his farm, a place she treasured since her early childhood. She's been missing from her family for far too long, and it's time someone's come forward." End quote. Delphine was 15 years old when she disappeared. She had curly, shoulder-length brown hair, hazel eyes, and she stood 5'3", being around 134 pounds. She was last seen wearing a blue Levi's denim jacket, knee-length hot pink jeans, a black leather purse which contained hairspray, a brush, pictures, makeup, and an address book. She also had white LA Gear running shoes on and a white Cotton Ginny brand sweater. So those are 3 missing children's cases from across Canada. I had never heard about them before until I just stumbled across them on one of the missing persons websites that I look through. There are an endless amount of people's pictures on there. It's so sad, an endless amount of names of people who are missing that I have never ever heard of before. Some of them don't even have as much information as these cases do, and they have simply a sentence of what may have happened to them or what happened to them before they disappeared. And it's truly, truly sad that there's so many people who are missing out there. And I'm all for talking about current cases and bigger cases and continuing to spread the word for those people as well. Their cases are just as important as well. But then we get to cases like these that happened like 40 years ago before the internet even existed, and no one's talking about these people. And I just feel like if their cases could be talked about more and their photos and their names could be shared out there more, maybe it'll trigger something in someone's mind out there that they'll remember something, and maybe they'll send in a tip that could help crack these cases. What happened to Sylvia, Nancy, and Delphine? They deserve to be found. They deserve justice, and their families deserve answers. If you have any information of what happened to these 3 girls, I'll have individual contact information down in the description box for each case. If you know something, please say something. It's never too late to solve a case. Please share this video out there on your social medias, on Facebook, share their missing persons flyers, share their photos and their stories and their names. It's the best thing we can do to continue to talk about these people so they're not forgotten. Let's have a big conversation down below. How do you feel about these 3 cases? Is there any information that I didn't include in this video that you know about? What are your theories on what may have happened to these 3 girls? And would you like me to continue doing videos like this? Because these are videos that I'm really passionate about doing, and I would love to continue to do videos like this where I talk about lesser known cases. So I'll be in the comment section below chatting with you all. As always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you all in the next video.